How's it going, everybody? John here from the esports department, breaking down tonight's 4-game LPL and LCK slate, coming off the back of the 100K to first last night. Oh, tough slate. I know we've all talked it to death in the Discord and stuff, but really, honestly, the one thing I really needed to happen last night was for Gen G not to be the highest scoring team, so that was really painful, watching those first two series happen. And I wanted to use this as an opportunity to talk about results-oriented thinking, because we were going to do an evergreen on it, and I probably will, but just like a brief aside just to talk about that real quick. So results-oriented thinking is the idea of assuming that the result, if the result was good, then the process was good. And one of the things I always talk to people about is that you need to look back at your lineups and be able to determine, regardless of what happened, whether or not you made the right decision. You can watch the games, and if you're playing a set of lineups, there's got to be a lot of factors that play into why you decided to play those teams in your lineups. When you watch the games, you should be able to some degree or another determine whether or not the lineups that you created were created for the right reasons. For instance, if I say to myself, IG is playing against WE, I think Rookie is going to destroy Teacher Ma, and the mid-jungle duo for IG is going to absolutely crush WE. That's what I think is going to happen tonight. And then I watch the games, and actually Teacher Ma's fine in lane, and IG outplays them in a few team fights and wins the game. I shouldn't necessarily automatically think to myself, like, yes, I got this right, because I didn't put those lineups in for that reason. I put them in for a different reason, and I was incorrect about what was going to happen. It's not always the case. Sometimes the things that you're right about are a little bit more behind the scenes and not super obvious, but it's worth noting that you should really look at your lineups, look at the ownership on the slate, look at the different kinds of lineups you played, how the games played out, and decide based on that, not on whether or not you won money, on whether or not you had the right lineups. And so last night, the only reason I bring this up in this video is I just think it's the most ideal time to talk about it, because last night's slate is a perfect example. So Gen G and Sunning ended up being the winning lineup. And so ask yourself what had to happen in order for that to be the optimal combination. So SKT and Damwon Gaming had, and as well as DMO and IG, had two of the lowest scoring fantasy series of all time as far as like winning scores. Literally probably two of the bottom 5 series of all time. And Gen G's average score in their series was the highest average fantasy score for Gen G, I believe, all year. So if I'm looking at myself from last night, and I'm not trying to talk trash to anybody, dude. Play your lineups however you want to play your lineups. I'll never be mad at you. But if I played all Gen G lineups last night, I'm gonna look at last night's slate and go, okay, the team that I took was 40% owned, and it took 3 extreme outlier results in order for them to end up being optimal. And even then, it was still relatively close. Like, Sunning wouldn't have had to do a lot more to end up being the optimal stack, and it took a lot of outlier results. Like, Sunning had an average series for them, basically, where Gen G had a monstrous outlier of a series, and there was 2 other monstrous outlier series that happened before that. That's a lot of things that had to come together in order for that to end up being correct, and it was still a 40% ownership. So if I'm looking at my lineups from last night, I feel pretty good about where my lineups ended up, I think. I did have some Gen G, so I'm not just like crapping on people to play Gen G, I promise you. I thought Gen G was going to be like 9% owned. So I was happy to have some Gen G hedge lineups in there. But when I look back later after the thing, I look at those lineups that actually, they all cashed. All my Gen G lineups, they all cashed. But I look at them and say I shouldn't have had those lineups in the tournament. If I knew that Gen G was going to be 40%, I never would have entered those lineups to begin with. So that's just a small, tiny thing about results-oriented thinking. And looking at a mistake that I made last night, I promise I'm not trying to talk crap to anybody else. I felt like I made a huge mistake last night when I looked at the 70 Gen G lineups that I had in, and I saw how highly owned they were. So just a little thing about results-oriented thinking. Stop boring you guys. I just thought last night's slate was like a perfect example for that. We got 4 games tonight. There are some interesting ones and some less interesting ones. I think this is a good slate overall. I think there's good advantages to be had on this slate. Let's start with a Freak of Freaks, minus 335, 2-2 on the season. playing against HLE plus 235, 0-4 on the season. So terrible start to the season for HLE. I wouldn't be surprised to see a little bit of lineup shakeup from them. They just have looked pretty awful in almost every matchup. Afrika Freaks has been a little weird. We're going to be able to tell from the stats, but like gold per minute, it's pretty obvious that Afrika is better. But when you start looking at these other stats, like they have a better gold differential, minus 51 versus minus 249, but still minus 51. It's a little bit weird for a team that kind of, in theory, had looked pretty good in their matchups so far. First blood, first turret numbers aren't bad, but then again, gold differential at 15, kind of the same thing we were talking about. It's still a lot better than HLE's, but this is still like some red flag territory here. We're going to have to see how this evens out when they play some matchups with some other kinds of teams, but it's not necessarily looking that good for Afrika Freaks so far, even though like the eye test told me that they were doing pretty well this season, but when I'm looking at these stats, like 17-15 is not an awesome number either. So when I'm looking at these stats, I'm thinking maybe I was overrating Afrika Freaks in my mind. However, in this matchup, I don't think I'm overrating them. I think Afrika is extremely likely to win this matchup. HLE looks completely lost. I'm sure they're going to be like scrambling to try to make anything happen this season. And Afrika has a pretty good roster. They'll have dominance in the top lane, dominance in the bottom lane. The mid lane, you could argue, is maybe slightly HLE favored even. But other than that, it's just Afrika Freaks everywhere, with big advantages in the bot lane and big advantages in the top lane. So really tough to go against Afrika here. I will say, if you're looking for an underdog that might have some ceiling, I think HLE probably has some ceiling. If they beat Afrika, I think they'll probably score pretty well. I just don't think it happens that often. 235 might not even be accurate as far as I'm concerned. I think maybe they're more like a plus 300 underdog. So I like Afrika in the matchup in general. Looking at KPW and DPL, this is not an error. I went back and double-checked this one because it looks too weird to be true. But they actually have both a 17.2 kill per win and 17.2 deaths per loss. So we know what's going on with Afrika, 17.2. HLE, when they have won, it's been a 20, which is, they haven't won a lot of games. So this is going to have to average out. But like I said, it seems like they have ceiling on a win if they beat Afrika. Death per loss only 14.7. So that drags down the 17.2 KPW for Afrika. Makes them, look, let's see, it's 31.9, so 15.5 plus 0.5, 16. Averages out at about 16-ish. So mediocre, not super exciting, not terrible. Going on to the next matchup, DRX, minus 500, 4-0 on the season, up against Team Dynamics, plus 320, 3-1 on the season. So this matchup is very interesting because the statistics kind of go back and forth. DRX with a better gold per minute and a better gold differential, but not by a ton. 1856 to 1764 is a pretty big advantage. 163 to 140 is not that big of a deal. DRX with actually awful first blood and first turret numbers, which is really weird. Gold differential at 15, Dynamics is actually better, plus 1015 to plus 777. So Dynamics is having better early games than Dragon X. That being said, Dragon X has played a little bit more of a conservative scaling strategy this year versus what they were doing last year. It's almost like Gen G and Dragon X switch bodies. Last split, Dragon X was the really bloody team in the LCK, and Gen G was completely unplayable. Like anyone in a Gen G matchup, you just never touched it because their KPW DPL was so low. Like really low. It was like 11 kill per win or something like that. Something ridiculously low. And then this year, Gen G's been blooding it up, although admittedly last night I think that had more to do with Sandbox than Gen G. But they've been blooding it up, and DRX is the conservative KPW DPL team with a 12.6 KPW and a 15.3 on the DPL. Dynamics, kind of similar, a 13 kill per win, but their death per loss is a little higher. So DRX might be able to up this number a little bit. You're looking at 30.6, so 15.3 roughly. Expectation for DRX, a little bit lower than what we saw in the first matchup. I will say, it's a little bit different from Gen G last night because Dragon X is more expensive than Gen G was last night, but they're kind of in a bit of a similar position, and I wouldn't be surprised if last night influences the ownership a little bit and pushes Dragon X a little bit up, because last night what won was basically a team in the same position that Dragon X is in right now. They are more expensive, and I think what drove Gen G's ownership yesterday was the fact that you could play 80 carry captains with other favorites, and people just wanted that. or you could just play better captains in general with other favorites. As far as this matchup goes, I think it's pretty heavily DRX favored. I think these stats will move a little bit in the future. I am a little bit worried about this 27-27. I'd like to see Gen G or DRX pick that up in the future. But damage per minute also looking significantly better than Dynamics, and I just can't see Dynamics really winning a match here too often. Sure, DRX can be a kind of team that comes in with some flubbed strategies and just has an off day. They're definitely the kind of team that can do that. But I don't think Dynamics is where I'm going if I'm trying to spend money on underdogs today. They just don't seem like they're in the best position. Probably less likely to win and lower ceiling than a few other teams on the slate. I'd rather play HLE if I had to choose between HLE and Dynamics. But I think there's even better options on the slate. So let's move on to the LPL. OMG minus 165, 2-4 on the season. Rogue Warriors plus 120 on the season, 0-5. Or 0-5 on the season, plus 120 in the matchup. So, looking at the numbers, OMG 1755 to 1611, so big advantage for OMG there. Goal differential per minute, minus 77 to minus 363. First blood, first turret, very similar. Goal differential at 15, minus 108 for OMG, minus 2211 for Rogue Warriors. Oof. Damage per minute, 1696 for OMG, 1753 for Rogue Warriors, so they're fighting a little bit more. Looking at the KPW DPLs, 16.6 and 16.7 for OMG, 19 and 21 for Rogue Warriors. So Rogue Warriors is definitely a target team, the kind of team that you want to be playing against. Or playing as. And honestly, I would be all over that tonight on both sides. OMG has not looked like a team that's consistent enough to consistently beat anybody else in the league. I do worry about Rogue Warriors. Their stats are abysmal. Gelati pointed out a couple things in the chat earlier that I definitely think are true. Their stats look eerily similar to Victory 5 from last season, which is not a good thing for your team to look like. But also, Zwuji has not looked exceptional this season. And I definitely noticed this in the last few matches they've played. It used to be like 4 guys and they just tried to set up for Zwuji, and you just wanted them on tanks, and you just wanted Zwuji on some hyper carry. You wanted them to sit around and tank, and then you wanted him to outplay everybody and get the win. And they would sometimes. In recent times, Zwuji has not looked that good, and that really hurts this team, because that's the only way they've really ever got wins in the past, or at least since they had this kind of iteration of the roster. So I'm definitely worried about Rogue Warriors. I don't think Rogue Warriors is some sort of like smash underdog. I think OMG is a very, very reasonable favorite. I think they're going to win. Rogue Warriors, the stats are just damning on Rogue Warriors, and I know they have been switching the lineup a little bit, and these stats might get a little better as the lineup gets switched up. But OMG just has more talent too. I mean, mid lane's a big advantage for OMG, top lane's a big advantage for OMG. The jungle, I honestly am not a big fan of Hacker, so I think, like, I was a big fan of Hacker, but the last like 2 or 3 splits, I've not been a fan of Hacker. So I think it's probably more like even or maybe slightly Haro advantaged in the jungle. When it comes to the bot lane, SMLZ has been atrocious, and Zwuji, if he can find his ceiling again, has usually been pretty good. So it kind of depends on whether Zwuji's playing well. Like if I think he's playing well and he's playing at his potential, then Rogue Warriors has the jungle and the bot lane. If I think that Zwuji is not playing well, like he has been this split, then he's probably about equal with SMLZ, and you're dealing with better solo lanes on both sides of OMG. So tough matchup, but definitely one that you'd want to be targeting. I mean, these numbers are significantly bigger than anything we saw in the LCK matchups there. Let's see, 37.6, so 18.5 plus 0.3, 18.8 expectation for OMG. It's pretty big, significantly bigger than what we were seeing in the LCK. So good matchup to target on both sides. They probably are going to have pretty sizable ownership, but I think it's a great matchup to target. And the last matchup of the night, JDG minus 170, 3-2 on the season, playing against WE plus 125, 5-2 on the season. Probably the matchup of the night as far as viewership and just like enjoying ourselves and figuring out what's going on. This is a very fun little matchup. Looking at the stats, 1866 for JDG versus 1774 for WE, so advantage JDG. Gold differential per minute, 53 for WE, 129 for JDG. Both teams with pretty bad first blood, first turret, which is weird, especially for JDG. I'm very surprised that they're only 25-25 so far. Gold differential at 15. Both teams are negative, but only 12 gold for JDG and 416 gold for WE, so even worse early games from WE. Damage per minute, 1900 for WE, 2023 for JDG. Pretty much JDG advantaged in every statistic. And then when we look at the KPW DPL, 20.8 and 17.4, going up against 17.5 and 17.1. So once again, we're seeing matchups that are higher expectation than the LCK series, right along the same like rough area as the series we had before this. One place you could maybe get an advantage if you're playing like WE, for instance. I think if you play 4 WE players with 2 OMG players, that could be an advantage. People might be more likely to play 4 of their favorite and 2 of the underdog. As far as I go, I do think I'm going to lean away from WE a little bit. I talked about it in previous videos and stuff, but WE is one of those teams that has a lot of fans, a lot of people that play them every slate because they've been wildly successful fantasy-wise since the boom started. They won a lot of people, a lot of slates. They're one of the most like high visibility LPL teams in the DFS world. I see people talking about them all the time, like random people that aren't really League fans will just be like, I love Teacher Ma, I love Jumeng, you know, Beishang's a monster. It's because they've won a lot of people a lot of money in the last like 3 months. So they're a team that's always higher ownership than I think they should be, which makes for me JDG a better play. I do think that the combinations of LPL teams tonight are probably going to be very highly owned. Afrika Freaks might fit in there a little bit. We'll look at how they fit, but if you can play an Afrika Freaks carry captain with JDG or OMG, then that could be a popular lineup as well. But we'll have a look in a minute and see what the pricing looks like to see if there's something we can glean about where the ownership might go based on the pricing. Let's have a look real quick. So just real quickly, let me try a couple different combinations here. What happens if you do JDG and OMG, the 2 favorites from the LPL? It's 80 carry captain. So if you're getting 80 carry captain from those 2, then woo lads. What happens if you do Afrika Freaks and OMG? 80 carry captain. Afrika Freaks and JDG. Top lane captain. Interesting. So those must be the most expensive teams on the slate. I told you guys, I look over this as I'm going over it with you guys, and I build my lineups later. So I'm literally walking through this with you guys because I think that's the most effective way to learn, is me answering my own questions with you guys listening, basically. They're not mega expensive either. I'm a little bit surprised that we can only fit a top captain with them. What happens if you throw in like the team slot? OMG has a bit of a cheaper team slot. What if we did like OMG team slot, but then took out the rest of the OMG players? Just to see if this gets you a better captain. Lock OMG team slot. You can get a jungle captain at least if you put OMG team slot in there. So some value in maybe doing that if you're trying to differentiate in GPPs. Might be a good way to get better ownership on a really common set of lineups. Running switching around the team slots with these teams, because I think all 3 of these teams will be pretty popular. If you can play 80 carry captain with all of them, what happens if you try to pair with Dragon X? It's top lane captain if you try to pair with Afrika. You can get 80 carry captain with OMG. And then with JDG, it's top lane captain as well. So I think you're probably going to see less of DRX JDG and less of DRX Afrika than you might normally, just because you can't captain them super well, whereas DRX and OMG fits right in there, 2 favorites that you can get an 80 carry captain on, and reasonable favorites at that. Probably a popular set of lineups there. Let's look at the projections for the favorites. JDG followed by Dragon X, Afrika, and OMG actually projecting the least, although it's very close in that setup. JDG, then Dragon X, OMG, and Afrika. So OMG moving up a spot when he goes to the jungle. JDG, OMG, Dragon X, and Afrika, and that's Chovy there too. Chovy only projecting at 84 points, so a little bit interesting. Chovy can sometimes be a little higher on these lists, but AFS in last place. JDG, Dragon X with Deft, and then SMLZ and AFS. If I'm stacking OMG, I think that my first inkling is to not include SMLZ. He hasn't been very good recently. The 80 carries from these other teams are more likely to have big series than SMLZ, I think. So if I'm doing like a small stack of another team, I think if there's if you can't do it with an 80 carry captain, I think SMLZ might be the one spot on OMG that I might avoid. And looking at support, it's JDG, OMG, then Dragon X, and Afrika. So Afrika showing up as the least projected team of the four surprises me a little bit. I would have thought that Dragon X was going to be the least projected on this slate, but AFS actually showing up as the least projected. The LPL favorites are probably going to be pretty chalky, and they project the best, and rightfully so. Their matchups we saw in the KPW and DPL was pretty wide. They had heavier matchups than the LCK ones. Looking at the underdogs just to see who projects there. Looks like Rogue Warriors showing up the highest. That doesn't surprise me. Actually, no, that does surprise me. I would have thought WE would be the highest, and they are in the jungle. I would have thought it'd be WE followed by Rogue Warriors. But it's actually WE, HLE, and then Rogue Warriors in the jungle. In the mid lane, it's WE again, and then Rogue Warriors and HLE. WE, Rogue Warriors, HLE. WE, HLE, Rogue Warriors. Generally speaking, it's telling us WE is going to be the highest projected underdog. HLE and Rogue Warriors are going to be in the middle somewhere, leaning towards Rogue Warriors being second. And then Dynamics is going to be last. And Dynamics, as far as ownership and stuff, now that we know what we can get here, let's have a look at some possible ownerships. DRX, OMG and Rogue Warriors, HLE and AFS, WE and JDG. So I'm going to guess the highest ownership on this slate is OMG. They fit 80 carry captain in a lot of setups. Additionally, I think the WE and JDG matchup is more likely to be split in its ownership, whereas I think OMG is going to get the vast majority of the OMG and Rogue Warriors information there, or ownership there. So it makes a lot of sense to me that OMG would be the number one stacked team tonight. I'm going to guess that JDG is second. I think most people recognize that WE is a very variant team that can give up a lot of points when they lose, and JDG being the favorite against them, I think that's a target that some people will have for sure. For the third highest stack, I actually have an inkling that it might just be WE. It's a little weird. We don't usually see underdogs this high. But WE is a team that so many people like. They allow you to get 80 carry captain on this slate with other favorites. So you could play WE OMG with an 80 carry captain. I think that's going to be a popular combination. That makes a lot of sense to me that it would start out that way. And then I think DRX probably comes in next, followed by Afrika. Then for the big three underdogs, it's probably Rogue Warriors, HLE, and Dynamics. Afrika, if there's a part of this that I'm less confident about, it's Afrika and Dragon X. I think those could be switched, and possibly WE could be mixed in here too, but something tells me there's going to be a fair bit of WE ownership tomorrow night, or tonight. It's possible Afrika is higher than Dragon X, not because more people want to play Afrika, but because Dragon X is really expensive, and it can kind of force people off of them a little bit. Afrika is also pretty expensive for who they are. But I think unfortunately, the correct play, sort of the standard correct play, is probably just to play these teams that are the highest owned, unfortunately. Maybe mixing them with Rogue Warriors or mixing one with WE, maybe mixing in Afrika Freaks in there or something like that, but I do think those are kind of going to be pretty popular. So as much as the games are pretty good, it does seem like it might be kind of a chalky slate. Back to looking at cash game lineups. The two biggest favorites on the slate would be the two Korean teams. Yep, Afrika Freaks and Dragon X. You're only getting a top lane captain there at 582.8. What happens when you just mix anybody else in? I should have just looked at these numbers earlier, of course. You get DRX OMG is 602.6, so a big upgrade there, but a lot more risk. Dragon X and JDG is 601.3. JDG and OMG is 616.6. And what about OMG and Afrika? OMG AFS 598.6, so we dropped back down there. OMG, or sorry, Afrika and JDG 602.5. And lastly, Afrika and did I already do that one? I did. Afrika and Dragon X. Okay, so the highest ceiling cash lineup would be JDG OMG. I also think those are definitely the most variant matchups. I think what I might like is going down to something like an Afrika Freaks JDG, still giving you a very likely chance to win. You do lose some ceiling, but you outproject a lot of these other lineups. DRX OMG, maybe. For me, it's like I say, I think for cash, probably I'm going to look at something like Afrika and JDG, something like that. I think that could provide pretty good value. DRX versus Dynamics seems like the fade match to me, so I'm pretty fine fading that. And that's pretty much what I'm looking at for this slate. There's a lot of different variant cash lineups, and at this point you should be kind of starting to look over the cash lineups we're mentioning here and make your own decisions about. You can kind of break this down mathematically. Look up what each of their implied win percentages is using their Bovada odds. Then go through and see what percentage of the days of the month that means they're going to win. Compare it to the other team. Compare the differences in projections. So if A outscores B by 10, but A wins 24 days a month and B only wins 17 days a month, they get 7 extra days of winning. And then on the days that they both win, there's still outlier performances that can happen from the lower scoring team. So a lot of the times it's better to play a lower projected favorite if they're a bigger favorite, just to get that win percentage. And you never know when something like last night's going to happen and your chalky, huge favorite with low KPW is just going to blow up the slate. So I think that's about all for me for this slate. An interesting one, a fun one. I'll definitely be playing it a lot. Hopefully we get some takedowns and get a better taste in our mouth after last night. I know some people had some good success last night, so shout out to you guys. But get a better taste in our mouth going into this slate here. I do like some of these games, so should be fun. As usual, hit me up on the Discord, hit me up on Twitter, wherever you want to hit me. We'll talk about it, I promise. If you send me a message, if I'm not asleep yet, I will respond to you. I am going to have to go to sleep pretty soon since I was up all night. I'm still up to record. But if I'm still awake, I will respond to you and answer any questions I can. I'll talk to you guys later, guys.